In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, March 28, 1979, during the middle of the night at 4 a.m., a nuclear reactor overheated and let out some very bad radioactive materials to areas nearby. This reactor had been in operation for 5 years since 1974. There were 4 nuclear reactors on 3 Mile Island. In the Unit 2 reactor, there were problems in reacting and generating cooling systems. This caused a pressure-relieving valve to automatically open, and it wouldn't close. The core had fuel rods that produced heat through nuclear fission. Because the valve was stuck open, the water used to cool down the fuel rods got out. The operators did not know what was going on, and there were no signs that showed the valve was clearly open. After sirens went off, the operators thought the problem was from excess water, so they turned the emergency system down very low that immediately dumped water onto the core. This was bad because without the water to cool it down, the fuel rods in the core heated up to about 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit instead of the usual 600 degrees Fahrenheit. As a result, half of the Unit 2 core melted, and extraordinarily high levels of radiation were released within a huge dome-shaped structure that the reactor was in. For some time after it occurred, people were unaware of the severity of it.
I was pretty young at the time, so I really didn't understand how severe it was. I really only learned about it when I went to school, and my friends, I remember, actually were talking about it at the lunch table, and that's when I started to get a little bit concerned about it and realized that really it wasn't anything that had been discussed at home at all.
The governor of Pennsylvania was in charge of making the final decision, ordering everyone to leave because of the situation or letting everyone stay. If he let everyone stay and there was a release of chemicals, a public health disaster would occur. But forcing everyone to leave could cause destruction, economic loss, injuries, and even death.
I remember that I really learned about the potential accident or the 3 Mile Island accident at school from friends. And when I came home, it was usually just my mom at home because my dad traveled a lot. And I had to ask her about what we were going to do if there was an actual nuclear accident or the reactor melted down. And honestly, I don't think my mom had any real answer to tell us as to what she thought we were going to do. I remember saying we were going to actually travel to my grandmother's house, who lived in Rhode Island, if it really came down to us needing to evacuate.
The governor did not force everybody to leave, but 144,000 people evacuated voluntarily. The next problem that they came across was a large hydrogen bubble that formed in the pressure vessel of the reactor. Authorities feared the bubble would explode, but they soon found out that nothing bad was going to happen. The 144,000 people who voluntarily evacuated returned back to their homes. The accident started new worries about the safety of nuclear power. There was even a protest in New York City to end nuclear power in the U.S. in general, with 200,000 participants.
On March 28, 1979, the 3 Mile Island Unit 2 reactor near Middletown, Pennsylvania partially melted down, releasing radioactive fumes into the atmosphere. According to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the plant experienced its first malfunction at 4 a.m. that same day on one of the 2 reactors on site. A mechanical breakdown was causing the reactor's cooling system to fail, which in turn caused pressure in its primary system to rise. In order to fight the increasing pressure, a valve located on top of the reactor's pressurizer opened. The valve was supposed to close once the pressure levels were stabilized. However, it jammed and stayed open. Staff didn't know the valve had failed to close because instruments in the control room did not indicate otherwise. It wasn't until alarms began to ring that the staff realized the reactor was releasing coolants due to the open valve.
Public support for nuclear energy fell from the highest it's been, 69% in 1977, to 46% in 1979. Although there were no long-term health effects, 2 million people were exposed to small amounts of radiation.
I really wasn't sure at the time what the health effects of the reactor melting down would be. There wasn't really anything I had ever learned about what the exposure to radiation would do. We really didn't, in my mind, live that close to the reactor, so I didn't think that it was an issue. I think we were probably lived about a little over 100 miles away. So again, I think I learned about the dangers of it really from, my friends at school. And I think my mother tried to kind of just tell me things to make me really not worry and be too concerned about it. Whereas my friends seemed they got a little more in detail as to what they thought could actually happen and how people could die from it.
The worst commercial nuclear accident in United States history was caused by just mechanical and human errors. The cleanup of 3 Mile Island lasted 14 years and costed over $1 billion. The damaged reactor was permanently closed and covered with concrete after the accident. A main takeaway is the changes in nuclear power laws after 3 Mile Island. An anti-nuclear movement emerged during a social movement against the global nuclear arms race at the height of the Cold War in the early 1960s. Some major changes were upgrades of the plant designs, enhancing emergency preparedness, expanding international knowledge of nuclear safety with other countries, expanding the inspector program, having senior managers regularly analyze plants, having a more clear public report, so the public is more clear about what's going on, and showing the critical role of humans in power plants. Having a faster identification of safety-related problems.
I guess one thing that I really remember pretty clearly about it was that I honestly had no idea that there was really anything dangerous going on until I went to school and started talking to my friends at school about it, and they started asking me these questions about what my family was going to do if there was a reactor meltdown, and I honestly kind of felt like a dummy because I really didn't know anything about it or really realize the severity of actually what was going on. And my friends, everybody was talking about it, and I kind of sat there and just listened because I really didn't know that there was anything of major issue going on. And that's when I went home and started talking to my mom about it, and she told me that I really shouldn't worry too much about it, but it seemed like quite a big deal with my friends at school.
Although there were no main health effects and no main injuries, this was still a very scary part of people's lives that won't be forgotten. Some say it was a coincidence that there was a thriller film called The China Syndrome that dealt with the same problems and was created around the same time, but a little bit before the accident. It was about a fictional nuclear meltdown outside of Los Angeles. Before the 3 Mile Island incident, the nuclear industry called the plot far-fetched and impossible. They were known as Black Swan events. I learned that in this time period, information about nuclear power wasn't well known to the average person, and it was a relatively new kind of power. I also learned that many people had different takes on the situation.
One of the other things I remember is, again, that my mother really didn't seem that worried about it, and I actually felt like, from everything that I learned at school, that maybe she should be a little bit concerned about it, and I felt like at that point I almost pressed her to have some sort of a plan if the reactor actually melted down. And I can't remember if it was my brother or sister, but one of them actually suggested that we go to my grandmother's house, who lived in Rhode Island, and we figured we would be far enough away and safe if there was a nuclear accident.
My stepdad Mike's family didn't seem to worry too much about the incident, while other families were very worried about it. This has taught me to be more prepared because anything can happen at any time. This event has made a huge impact on the United States and for sure will not be forgotten.